Okay, hello everybody, Happy New Year, welcome to 2023. So first of all, I should say that somewhere in October I totally ran out of steam. I think I wrote 24 books of over 20,000 words and then numerous other bits of work as well. And I was just feeling really shattered and I just ran out of steam, which is the reason there were no more podcasts, no other reason. And I know a lady asked me about Singapore, and do you know, I'm featuring Singapore in the book now. The good news is I have been working on a book of world predictions. I had wanted it ready in late November, but I thought, well, what's the problem? I mean, it's going to be relevant for the whole of 2023, so I don't have to totally kill myself getting it ready, but it's almost ready. So there's a kind of yearly overview of patterns and trends, and then I've done loads and loads of different countries, right? And like I say, different countries I'm often asked about. I haven't got Vietnam and Nigeria. I just don't know enough about the politics in those countries, and the charts weren't incredibly revealing to me. But since I'm feeling a little bit more mentally energetic, I will put my mind to it and try and include those in the second edition, even if they don't make the first edition. Don't know how the formatting will go with it, because I've included all the charts, the pictures of the charts as well. I don't know how that will work out if I do it in paperback. Might be a mess, but I'm going to try and do it in Kindle and paperback. Fabulous. So I just wanted to talk about something that's just my getter that I've got up there, and I wanted to talk about some newsy items first. For example, Andrew Tate, John Campbell, and the film died suddenly, and I'll just leave that story up there when we talk. I'm not really going to talk about that one, but anyhow, let's get cracking. So first of all, Andrew Tate. Now, I was aware of him. I did used to watch Celebrity Big Brother. I quite enjoyed Big Brother. I found it an interesting commentary on the kind of experiment, because it was a microcosm of what they do to us universally. You know, they had that whole divide and rule. They were always separating people into teams, playing them off against each other, you know, picking protagonists and antagonists and then highlighting them just to create friction, and just generally trying to upset people as much as possible. So they go to the diary room and pour their heart out to Big Brother and ask Big Brother for help, which is what they do in real life. Like, they menace us endlessly and then hope that we'll all run to the government looking for salvation. So just felt I must justify my watching of Big Brother. I did feel that it really was set apart to all those really intellectually puny shows like, X Factor and the Jungle thing, which are so contrived, you know. I can't believe that after how many years of I'm a Celebrity, but Get Me Out of Here been going on. You know, there was a time when it first came out, maybe it was a bit novel and slightly more interesting, but I don't know how it hasn't run out of steam and run out of legs. I mean, basically, the whole show is advertising. They never stop cutting for adverts. Then you have to have Ant and Dec and their inane and ghastly gags that they don't even deliver very well, and they're really, they should be Butlins entertainers, which I don't know if you guys in the States and whatever, you won't know what Butlins is, but imagine that sort of thing like Dirty Dancing was set at, like a holiday camp, except Butlins would be like minus a lot in terms of the aesthetic value, but I mean, that's all they're good for. And then they spend the whole time giving out phone numbers of who you'll ring to nominate for the bleeding trials. Then what's the other thing they do? Oh yes, they have to give you a recap. So as soon as they come back from adverts, they have to recap everything that happened, and usually nothing happened, so it's just replays of what some stupid celebrity said in the Bleeding Bush Telegraph. And then it's like a preview of what they're doing for the next trial, which is the same trial we've been seeing for sort of 25 years. It sounds like I know the show inside out, but I watched it about 10 years ago and I don't believe it's changed, so it's not that difficult to predict what's going on there. And then they say, oh, the celebrities, they get a chance to reveal themselves. Like when? There's about 5 minutes in the whole 45-minute show where the celebrities actually have a conversation with each other. Mostly it's just tasks, talking about food, and then straight back to Ant and Dec, straight back for adverts, straight back for phone numbers, or then some dumb celebrity giving us another recap of what we just saw. I mean, they'll go and do, sorry to talk about this, but I just thought a little bit of chat New Year's Eve, why not? I mean, they go and do the trial. So you've seen the trial. Then you have to hear the celebrity talking about how they felt about the trial. Then you have to hear them telling the other campmates how they felt about the trial. And then several other campmates will go in the bush tucker to recount what just happened, which we've already had like about 15 versions of. Oh my God, drives me mad how people watch that show still. But anyway, so Andrew Tate, he was in Big Brother at some stage. I don't even remember him. I probably got thrown out. I don't even think he made such a stir. I know he does come on InfoWars, like occasionally, and he went viral with that really obnoxious video of him saying how much better it is flying private because you don't have to wear a mask and go through all the customs rigmarole and you get around all the COVID restrictions. And he was really nasty about air hostesses and called them minimum wage bitches and all. I mean, it's, you know, I just find him obnoxious and far too callous, crude, abrasive. He's like rough sandpaper to me. I did listen to him on Delingpole. A lot of what he said was fairly sensible, but like something was saying to me, oh, don't trust this guy. So sure, he's been arrested or whatever has happened. But interestingly, he had talked in the past about his father being in the CIA. Now, we only have his word for it, and he talks so much rubbish that, well, it may or may not be true. But his father started out in wrestling. Then he was in the Air Force. Apparently, according to Andrew Tate, he had to learn Russian, and he managed to master Russian and be fluent in it within 3 weeks because he was like super intelligent. This is the father. And I think, well, interesting. It does lend credibility that he might have been in the CIA because he would have needed to learn Russian. So that lends a bit of credibility to that. Then he became the first African-American Grand Chess Master, and he used to tour around playing chess. And I'm thinking, well, CIA would be interested in someone who had the analytical skills or the tactical skills to play chess. So it lends itself to that actually being true. If it's true that his father was CIA, now I believe that his father also liked a bit of and was a bit unruly when he had a bit too many of these. He was into the vices. And so his mother left him and brought the 3 children up in Luton, Tate being the oldest. But it's interesting that he found his way into reality TV. So did his younger brother Tristan find his way in, and they've gone really mainstream now, despite, you know, him being featured as a high-profile kind of anti-vaxxer in the media and getting a lot of backlash. He's on with Piers Morgan. Interesting. Seems to me he's very in with the mainstream media. David Icke always says, when someone's nowhere and suddenly they're everywhere, that's a red flag. And I feel Andrew Tate was pretty much nowhere. I mean, I'd seen him on InfoWars. He was doing a little bit of stuff on maybe YouTube or whatever. All of a sudden, the press are focusing on him as an anti-vaxxer, and then suddenly he's everywhere and he's pushing out this narrative. Prior to the press having a go at him, he was totally off radar. Now he's got a big show on Rumble, another suspect channel. Rumble, it's going to be bought out by Apple. Soon it's going west. I don't trust that channel either. But anyhow, that's also, you've got jerks like Russell Brand on there. So he's suddenly everywhere. Now then there was a spat with Greta just to propel him into the headlines before his so-called arrest. If that really happened. I mean, maybe he is involved with trafficking. I really don't know, but let's not be distracted by it, because at the end of the day, I don't think he's a good guy. I don't think he's on our side. And just because people say a few things that, you know, seem reasonable and sensible doesn't mean we should all rush and be hanging on their every word. I'm not quite sure if he's as popular as they say he is. And as I say, maybe he's inspiring some young men or whatever, but yeah, I think people are mainly turned off by this boasting, this pig-headedness. I guess that's the kind of image he's trying to present as, gee, I'm so pig-headed, but it's part of the whole bravado thing. But it just doesn't really work, because at the end of the day, he's not very funny with it. He isn't particularly engaging or charismatic. It's all just act, it's show, and it's done in such a nasty way. So there we go. That's my thoughts on him. I'm not going to be paying any further attention to the guy. Was quite interested to be... Oh yes, let's talk next about John Campbell. Now, I do remember at the very start when there was a lot of this disease in China. I was watching a guy called Steve Lookner. Don't recommend him. Anyway, he's a bit of a mouthpiece, but I knew him from Right Side Broadcasting, and he was doing his own show. And at the beginning of 2020, he was the only person who was covering the case numbers in China, and that there was this emerging disease in China called COVID, and he covered the release of the numbers in the different provinces every night. And I found it quite interesting, because at the time, our media in the UK, particularly in the US, with radio, broadcast media, whatever, newspapers, they were saying, oh, it's a nothing burger, it's a Chinese problem, it's not an issue, oh, don't worry about it, it's really nothing. They were playing it down. Because they were playing it down, I thought, I need to be abreast of this. But then, of course, we know the narrative changed. However, in those early days, when the mainstream media in the UK were totally playing it down, it hadn't even really got on the radar. We were still celebrating Brexit, or moaning about it, whichever side of the fence people were on. Because remember, on the 31st, we Brexited, so it was all about Brexit. Boris had only recently won the election. We had this new mammoth Tory majority. It was all this normal politics. No one in the UK was cared about or talking about COVID in the Jan and Feb, but John Campbell was. And he was at the vanguard of pushing that this is a serious disease, people are dying, respirators, quarantine camps, people being put in quarantine, people being moved to these emergency hospitals, talking about how well China were getting organized in terms of building up these hospitals, stopping travel. He had all that information. So he was at the vanguard of pushing COVID as a problem. And now down the line, he was pretty keen on the narrative, let's just call it that. And in the last sort of 5 to 6 months, he's really coming out. Now he's at the vanguard of the pushback. But it reminds me of that song, Too Much, Too Little, Too Late. Yeah? So I believe he's at the vanguard of what we'll see in 2023 as the great reveal. The dam is about to burst on this one. There's a huge groundswell of public opinion forming behind that. And what's interesting about John Campbell, he's always been on YouTube, right? I know some people say he has to be careful on YouTube. Yeah, but he's always been on there. He's got millions of viewers, a huge audience. I believe he's also part of the kind of system. Maybe he doesn't know it, but he kind of is. So those are my feelings on him. Right, what's going on? What's happening in China? I don't believe any of it. It's deja vu. It's like Casablanca. Play it again, Sam. And I tell you what, doesn't it show that these elites or the mainstream media have like zero imagination? They're running the crematoriums are running all day. The bodies are stacking up. They had a picture on the mainstream media of this long queue of people, and they said they were queuing outside the crematorium. You know what? I'd bet you any money they're probably queuing at the testing center because, you know, they've got the QR codes on their phone, and as soon as they've been in close contact, they have to run and get themselves tested, or some people have to get tested every day. So they're probably queuing to get tested. I don't think they were queuing to get bodies into the crematorium or whatever. Then they showed a whole lot of bags purporting to be bodies. Well, don't know. Could have been potatoes in there. So I don't really believe anything that's coming out of there. However, I believe the raison d'etre of all this is a vaccine passport, because they are pushing it. And who's pushing it in the UK? Nigel Farage and Richard Tice. So they're the leaders of reform, which, if you're not in the UK, it's kind of the only slightly to the right party who providing pushback, because the Tories and the Labour and Lib Dems, totally SNP in Scotland, totally sold out to the whole World Economic Forum. So we've only got the so-called Reform Party, some other smaller ones, with Nigel Farage and Richard Tice, who's slightly pushing back. But, you know, Nigel Farage is banging the drum where, oh, yes, it's bad in China. We've got to make sure they've been tested, and they need to have evidence that they're COVID clear, or they've passed their COVID test when they come into the UK. So he's now at the vanguard of pushing for something that will eventually become a vaccine passport, because you can't discriminate and say, well, only Chinese have to do it. When they leave their country, you're going to say, well, everyone has to do it. And that's going to morph into a vaccine passport. Doesn't this just show you that dear old Nigel is totally on board? But it was the end for me with Nigel. I was kind of like skeptical of him before, as you know, if you regularly watch me. But it was sort of the end when he said that Tony Blair should be the vaccine czar. It's like, who in their right mind would say that? I mean, if Tony Blair's for something, I'm instinctively against it, no matter what it is, because it's bound to be something totally nefarious, horrendous, and liberty-ending. So for him to say that was, you know, really, really, really strange, and rang an alarm bell for me. So there's old Nigel pushing for the whole vaccine passport agenda. So you just have to be so cautious these days. I don't want to go down the route of Hugo Talks and demoralize people by saying, oh, you can literally not trust anybody. But you just have to be really careful. Now, let's, as you can see, that was from my getter there, and that's where I had a Reddit post talking about Andrew Tate. I think Hugo Talks mentioned it again, talking about his father being CIA. And it reminds me of Mark Delvlin and that book he did covering the music industry, where he talks about how many of these rock stars, which seem to be sort of spontaneous creations, had parents involved in the military, intelligence services, blah blah blah. I mean, it's quite crazy. I mean, Bob Dylan, the police, he goes into it in quite a lot of detail. And here's just another example with Andrew Tate. So when you hear people have got a kind of military connection, it's always interesting to be just a slight bit skeptical of them. And I mean, okay, let's talk about now. As you know, I was saying that last year that I thought the British government would collapse, Rishi Sunak's government. And we see in the paper today that as we go into the new year, they're talking about this triple threat. Well, I'd say it's more than a triple threat. I mean, it's just a pile-on of problems. We've got continuing strikes in the UK, which I always said the unions smell blood in the water. The unions and Labour are going to push this to the nth degree because they see it as a way to weaken the government, maybe bring it down and get in a Labour government. Because, I mean, while this current Tory government seemed to be 99% on board with all the World Economic Forum things, because they are still in name Tories, they have to go a little bit slower. But if they actually get a Labour government in, they can speed the whole thing up, which is probably what they want. And they've got the problem with ongoing money going into Ukraine, the fact that NATO's running out of weapons. It's been a bit of a disaster. I note they still like to run the stories about Putin's health in the media. However, that's to demoralize Russians. So for any people in Russia who have access to the Western media, those stories are for them. I don't think they're for the Western market particularly. Well, I suppose they are in a way. It's all part of the propaganda, but they are there. A lot of the stories in the Western media are actually there to demoralize people who support Putin in Russia or beyond, right? That's where those stories are there. So that's a complication for Sunak. The strike's a problem, the dire state of the economy, inflation, the gas prices are going up for a lot of people today, for other people in April. So we're going to see pressure pounding on, and that's also going to build up the problems. Plus we have like the big reveal, this groundswell with the MP, Andrew Bridgen. I do recommend, guys, he did an excellent interview with Matt Letitia, and he did a really good interview with James Dellingpole. And I have a lot of time for Andrew Bridgen because what he says is entirely reasonable. And he seems to be a down-to-earth MP who came up kind of the right way. And he seems to have had a good track record of doing an awful lot of good in his constituency, which, if you don't know, it's northwest Leicestershire. Very central to the country of England, for those of you who don't know it so well. And he was saying that a lot of MPs now understand what's going on. They're very, very scared. He says there are many people, very, very high-profile people in the British media. He insinuated it's the broadcast media. He said they know, simply by virtue of their mailbags, their emails, the tweets they're getting, they kind of know what's going on. And they say, oh, well, if I go to my supervisor, or what do they call it? I don't suppose they call it a supervisor, their producer or whatever, or they go into a meeting and they discuss it, they could be fired. Yeah, well, get fired. How much more money do these people want? I mean, they're obviously on an excellent wicket, so I don't know why they don't just jump in, but maybe when it comes to the new year, some of them will. I mean, we've had numerous of these articles where people are trying to back away. On my Twitter, I saw that there's some woman in Sweden who is saying that we were all misled and now we've got to forgive each other for the past differences. And it's like, no, we weren't all misled. A lot of us weren't. A lot of people were shouting very loudly and were demonized. And I don't think it's a case of, oh, let's just forgive and forget. That never happened. Move on. No, we've got to have a full investigation to why people stuck like glue to certain narratives, even when, it didn't look good. But, when huge amounts of evidence were coming out from incredibly credible people. I mean, some people obviously either didn't do their research and obviously very stupid and shouldn't be in those positions, or they just don't understand what journalism is. But you can see how people are very addicted to their jobs in the mainstream media. I mean, there must be perks that we haven't dreamed of. Because, boy, they won't walk away, will they? What will it take? I know the levels of integrity and morality are probably rather low, and ethics, but they won't walk away. Like Anna Breeze was saying on her Twitter, I don't know much about her, I mean, I vaguely know what she's about and what she's been saying, but she was saying, oh, well, working on GB News is nothing like the BBC, and kind of all nostalgic for the glory days working at the BBC. And I'm thinking, who would want to work in an organization? I mean, it's very pompous as well. I mean, they are so condescending, so pompous, so stuffy. I mean, that's one reason why you wouldn't really want to work there. But the other reason is, why would you want to be part of such a ruthless propaganda machine pumping out that? Surely you'd want to say, gosh, I'm ashamed that I've had anything to do with these outlets. I don't know. But no, that isn't the attitude. The attitude is nostalgia. And Katie Hopkins is the same. She's also massively nostalgic for her days of having a column and being on LBC. And I'm thinking, oh, LBC is not that great, you know. It's a bunch of old losers. A lot of those people there, you know, what we've seen now with Piers Morgan. When he's not like being foisted on you on ITV, because people who watch the regular programming don't have a choice, when he has to do his own show on YouTube, can't raise an audience. And most of those mainstream people, whether it's the Loosed Women or the Fools and Hollies, if they said, okay, tomorrow there's no more TV, you go on YouTube and you'll be paid according to how much of an audience you can draw, and you have to compete with everybody else that's on YouTube, they'd get a fright. They wouldn't be earning very much, you know, because they're just not that good. But they foist it on people, and we see that Piers Morgan can't draw an audience. So you have to say, these people aren't particularly good, and when they face competition in a free and open market, rather than just be the legacy media, and I tell you what, legacy is the right word for it, because these people have been there since Moses' day. You just can't shift them out. You know, once they get the foot in the door, they never move, and you can understand why. They don't want to go anywhere because it's so great. But like I say, Katie harping on how great it was at LBC, it's not a great station. It's third rate. You know, most of the shows are incredibly predictable and dull, and it's so clear that the whole radio station is just a mouthpiece for certain agendas. And I mean, let's just put it this way, it's boring. Move on, people. But as I say, they're so addicted to their old careers in the legacy media that it kind of tells you how much benefit they get out of doing that, what the perks are. And that's probably what keeps people trotting out what they have to say, despite all evidence to the contrary, blah, blah, blah. So, okay, I thought that was just a nice little catch-up chat. There's a couple of other things I'd like to mention about other important stories that have happened in the last few months and where we're going. Oh, yes, just to say, I still think I didn't finish that point about the British government collapsing. That is my prediction for the new year. There's going to be a pile-on of crisis upon crisis, and the British government would collapse. And interestingly, I saw George Galloway tonight, despite him strongly disagreeing with me when I rang in to say the same thing, he is now saying that he predicts this year the British government would collapse. Now, I mean, look, we can't celebrate that, because what's coming in its place is not necessarily going to be any better. But in a way, it's a sign of progress, of pressure, and the more people sort of distrust the political system, in a way, that is progress, isn't it? So that was my prediction for the UK, among other things, which you've basically heard me talk about before, but I thought we'd just recap that one, and so we'll see when that domino falls in the new year.